million different ways that we deliver them. The particular products that I'm involved with, we chelate them with an amino acid. It does not have a charge, so it slides right into the plant. That's anything. Iron, calcium, hormones, biostimulants, etc. And we give the superintendent or the field manager control. More efficient than soil applications, up to 95%. More efficient than soil applications, that's a comparison to granulars. Next slide, we'll get to that. But whatever I put down, 95% of it in foliar application is being used. If I put a granular down, the best I could hope to get is about 60%. And we bypass those problems, those struggles in the root zone that we were talking about earlier. Better delivery system when soils are cold and wet and lack oxygen. We can start doing this when it's about 10 degrees out. And we're not photosynthesizing. It can be shady, like Dr. Brown was talking about earlier today. And we will get a reaction. We will get that plant to start working. Okay. So that's how Jim McConnell used to fertilize. Put something out there, gets real green, starts fading off. We put something else out there, gets green, starts fading off. I don't disagree with feeding the soil with granules. Please do not walk away from here today thinking that you can look after every piece of grass in the world with liquids. There are uses for granules that are answered by using the soil test. But that's tough to manage. That's my bag of fertilizer. I can help it manage by spraying foliar nutrition in all these little corners here. I can reduce my rate of granular fertilizer, those big huge lines, and have it all match up and have linear growth. Soil applied fertilizers are inefficient. N, P, K, calcium, magnesium, and sulfur. This comes from the University of Iowa. I'm going to say maybe 6, 7, 8 years ago. I don't think those numbers would have changed. The fact of the matter is we're putting minerals into the system and they will tie up. They will be inefficient. Foliar feeding is 95% efficient and generally 9 to 20 times more efficient than soil applied nutrients. If you need an answer to the question right now, put it in the plant and solve the problem right now. And that's answering what I just said. It's not one thing, it's everything. Darcy and Tom are here now. They're going to talk to you about biologicals that I mentioned at the beginning of my talk, and it goes with everything. It is truly live eggs law. In the absence of one thing, you're not going to have the quality that you need. Now, I didn't make this. I did steal this off you because I ain't that good. That's our tight soils. That's probably right about now on your left. We've been running on it all winter. Mother Nature threw a bunch of water on it on Friday night. Then we ran on it on Saturday morning. And we're all tightened up. And all those little positive and minus signs, that's how we exchange nutrition in the soil. We get hooked up with something that likes something else. We need to spread that out. And we can spread that out with aerification, with venting is probably a better word for it today. And we can make things work a little better because we've introduced oxygen. But there are products now, humic acids, calciums, potassiums, magnesium, sulfur, and miners, that will do that chemically. And there's nothing wrong with any of those things. Humic acids have been around for centuries. I think it was the Greeks that used to take kelps and things, and then they started trading with someone from Scandinavia. As soon as they start putting the humics out of their forests in Scandinavia, their food production doubled. So this is a new science. This is new tools in your guys' toolbox to do a better job, to have more control for yourselves. And where is my food? My best scientific friend in the entire world is in the audience today. We have a very scientific and professional disagreement on where we should be with pH. And the conversation is still evolving, and now we both agree that we can have different pHs on the surface than we can in the root zone. And I challenge everybody in the room to start thinking that way because this is super interesting. My food's only available for turf grass, I'll be next year. 5.5 to 7. That kills me to say that. But if you look at all where the HAs are, not those guys. The highly available portion of all those nutrients is in those soil pHs. I've been down at 5.2 with the soil test, not so far from here. It doesn't work. You can put the best, you can put an $85 bag of fertilizer down on a pH soil of 5.2, it's not going to work. That's just science. I'm not telling you anything, like it's not something that I came up with. It's not going to work. So we have to correct that. We have to set the table appropriately with a fork and a knife and a spoon and a napkin and a decent sized plate. And that's pH correction.
So looking at that right there, I see 6 and I see everything except for calcium and molybdenum highly available. And so would you say that ideally speaking 6 is where you want to be at? If you go up even to 6.5, you're already mostly available, you lose 3 more. And maybe 7, there's 3. So there's only 2 missing at 6. So
absolutely agree with you.
How much did you pay him?
What's that?
How much did you pay this year?
No. Man, he's the guy I'm having a disagreement with.
Oh, okay.
This is my good friend in Calgary, and I should have put the pictures the other way. We'll do this real quick. That was his sports field on the 10th of August in that previous slide with my probe. That's a pH 8.4 soil, and can we go back? Yeah. And that's what we're trying to grow grass on. The Calgary Flames would be better to have spring training on that stuff. It was as hard as ice than try to grow sports field on it, trust me. And you know, the question is, what do you do? Well, you take a soil test and figure out what we're going to do. But in 6 weeks, that is sodded. The game comes from Wausau. That guy's getting more plugs today. But I can put that sod down on that because that's actually what happened before we got there. Then it'll work for a while. It was pretty cool. We went to this field. They used big roll sod, put it down at pH 8.4. Roll it out, looked fantastic. The First Legion of Italian Soccer Doom came and played on it a couple Sundays in a row, even though they weren't allowed to. And then it all died. And the only part that was still alive was these little tiny lines where the seam was. Because there was at least oxygen there. And that was the only grass that survived on the whole field. Pretty amazing. So we went in and corrected the soil. We went and tilled up that stuff. We were 6 inches. We brought in 6 inches of mix. So that stuff's still down there. And we have to be aware of it. I don't think we have to manage it. He's not that good that he gets 6-inch root zone. But we changed it and made it appropriately. Same thing here. He was actually just honored by the grade 6 class who painted him a bunch of pictures. And it was all the fields that were green with his little basketball hoops. And there was like 12 of them that gave him his pictures just last week. But we took that wet, boggy, crappy area that was kind of not really anything, and Mike built the principle of field there, but we started at 8.7. And that exists in Alberta. pHs are a lot higher in Alberta, and you need to be aware of that. But that's where you start. Guys that just go, I used this last year, I'll use this next year. Those are the guys that still have dead grass in Calgary because the pH goes up that high. I'm not going to do that today because that's a little complicated and boring. The pictures are a lot more fun. Look at that, Stevie. We took pictures of your green a long time ago. March 13th, March 21st, April 10th. Foliar nutrition. We probably did some soil correction too. And May 16th. We make changes. And I'll tell you, doing this for as long as I've done this, and you guys can do it for your bosses or whoever you have to answer to, take pictures. Put a date thing on the back of your business card, throw it down there, take a picture, then take another one 3 weeks later. Because if you're doing something to make it better, no one's going to remember. This is a tournament a couple weeks ago at Point Grey, and a Canadian Tour event, and it's a really great story. As superintendent was interested in looking at what we had to offer, but was certainly not going to buy in lock, stock, and barrel. He had a fertilizer supplier. He's extremely happy with what they were doing. So we took certain pieces that he thought he was missing and added them into his program. So you don't have to just buy some, just Dave Duncan says to buy it. But he was missing calcium. He was missing some hormones. That's what that fortified thing is. He was certainly missing amino acid complex. That's the first thing we saw is the roots got bigger. The roots got longer. Even though we were mowing low, mowing twice a day, and rolling, and doing all this stuff, getting ready for the tournament. And the energy engine, the strong cell walls, and carbon addition, that is a vitamin and sea kelp product, basically. Squamish, lots of wind, lots of winter some years, and it's different. So we achieve basically the same result. Northview, down the road about 15 minutes. A huge demand for basically tournament type playing conditions every day, more from the superintendent and the ownership than from the people that play there, but they achieve that by fitting these things into their mix. They're another golf course like Point Grey that certainly doesn't buy everything lock, stock, and barrel from me, but they add these things in to complete the package. They don't even test their soils with me, to be honest with you, but they use some of my products to fit into the things that they're required to do based on testing. You guys are really gonna think that's Mike Schellenberg should be here. This is what my buddy in Calgary was in Medicine Hat, and this was his little package, his little program to get things from there to there. That's a putting green on the 23rd of July. I'm not lying, don't laugh. That's a putting green right there. You want to putt on that? 2 months later, it was that. And I couldn't have taken a picture of the roots. The plants were just kind of germinated. They were kind of sitting there. It's no one's fault, but no one did any testing. No one knew that the pH was at 8.7 or 9.2 or. There's somebody here from Medicine Hat today, isn't there?
Yeah.
How's that?
How is it?
Blowing and 42 and the pH sucks. Yeah. I was out there 3 times that summer.
Right?
Yeah.
Did you play the cards?
I never have, no. I hear I need to come at some point in time.
Who's your buddy that's there?
Mike Schellenberg used to be the superintendent.
Yeah.
Rob's there now, right?
Yeah.
Okay. They blasted through, buddy. How's that? I'm, due to my teaching background, we're going to have a math lesson now. It's only going to be one equation. It's going to lead to you being able to order exactly the amount of fertilizer you need from now on, the rest of the time. Because I promise, as smart as every Leo Brillman and everybody else gets, they can't change this math equation. It's the way it works. Any quality fertilizer program requires the following knowledge: square footage, acreage, quantity of product to be applied for reasons based on soil testing and what kind of products to be applied. I apologize, I am a gallons per 1,000 square feet and a square footage guy because I went to school in the U.S. Choose the desired rate of the fertilizer to be applied and use the analysis of the chosen nutrient. Those are the only 2 things that you require. That's it. Rate over analysis. That's the equation. Speaking of Scott's fertilizer, so I want to put half a pound of nitrogen down from an 18,918. 0.5 divided by 0.18 is 2.78 pounds of product. So I need 2.78 pounds of that 18,918 to achieve half a pound of nitrogen. It's the same equation for any fertilizer. You want to figure out how much calcium to use, you can do this for cow pearl, dog pearl, gypsum. To cover 150,000 square feet of greens, the requirement would be 150 times 2.78. 8.34 50-pound bags. I know you're all sitting up there moves. When I was at Westwood, it's not the same today, but when I was at Westwood, we were responsible for $1.2 million budget on 18 holes of golf. And the gentleman that I worked for required that you were perfect. The bags got taken out of the fertilizer room first, then we would be allowed to take 9 bags. Taken out of the fertilizer room first, they were counted, we did our calibration, and we came back in and there wasn't half a bag of fertilizer left. All hell broke loose. Because it is that important. You can't just buy 6 skids. 6 skids doesn't fly anymore. What do you absolutely need? And I know I've said this 900 times, but I'll go to a soil test and we can tell you exactly what you need. Calibration, once we know how many bags to apply to the specified area, we now need to figure out how to deliver that product. I know a lot of you in the room use Vicons. There's always a discussion when we get to this point, well, how do I grab it out of the back of that? Find some big bag. We used to use bulk line bags at the golf course, wrap them around the Vicon.
They actually make, but they make a catching bag for the back of the Vicon. You pull the wand off and it just clips on.
There you go.
They make one.
Do you want to show your golf club that I can take a picture of?
Absolutely.
Perfect. There you go. I learn something new every time I do this. That was your shot too, by the way.
Yeah, I realize it's probably on the spreader.
Yeah, on the spreader. So developing a 1,000 square foot area, load a few pounds of specified product into the spreader and measure the width of throw. That's going to get us one side of our 1,000 square feet. If this is done on concrete or asphalt, the product will bounce further than on turfgrass. Products will move further depending on the size of the product and the area of application. Choose a reasonable area similar to that area of application. I think the next slide uses 20 feet. Oh, maybe the slide after that. This is real important if you're walking. I don't know how many people walk their granular fertilizer applications, but the guy who's doing it, the guy who's going to make the application needs to be the guy that's calibrating that spreader. Because James Roberts in Western Plateau walked a lot faster than Dave Duncan with his little short legs. And sometimes he'd be on G and I'd be on H. We were putting down the same amount of product as we calibrated. Measure the width of throw of the product, put the remaining product back into the bag, record the width and divide by 1,000. So that must be the next slide. Yeah. So if that product threw 20 feet, all I gotta do is divide by 1,000 and I know I gotta walk 50 feet because that product's throwing 20 feet across and that will cover 1,000 square feet. Or we can divide it by 2 and divide 500 square feet. So you don't have to walk 50 feet. I don't know how well this shows up. I always say this. Should get a better slide. Maybe I'll check right now. Yeah, not very good. The point of this slide was that when you're behind a granular fertilizer spreader, there's one on the tractor, whatever. Due to gravity, you're not throwing as much fertilizer at the end of that width, at the end of that throw width, as you are in the middle. It's just a gravity argument. Anybody who doesn't believe me, buy 5 silver pie plates, put one right underneath the tractor, put one halfway out, put one at the end of the throw width, do the same thing on the other side, drive over the middle one, tell me how much more fertilizer is in the middle one than there is on the outside. So because of that, which is what I'm trying to show here, your left picture is kind of, you can see some granules of fertilizer if you're up front. This one is made complete coverage because the guys come back the other way. There it is. So that's what I was just explaining. We're looking at the top of the spreader. This is the pass that we're going to make across the surface. When I get out to there, I only got 1% of my application rate. So when I turn and come back, I want that 1% there to be right here. 20 to be on top of this, 40 to be on top of this, etc., etc. Does that make sense to everybody? My very good friend Eric Erickson, who I cannot talk about because he's not a superintendent anymore. I gave his presentation in Northern BC about 6 years ago. Then he looked at me and he says, "Can I talk to you after?" He goes, "I go throw and then I do it twice and that covers up all the shortfalls." Well, you take it twice as long to put the same amount of product. That wasn't funny? I'm almost done, I promise. Okay, so as the fertilizer is thrown further from the hopper disperses, it becomes less concentrated due to gravity. Imagine the middle of the hopper being 100 and the last row being thrown 1. When you come back, it's called wheel-to-wheel coverage. There's massive amounts of argument about if it's the right way or not to do it. I can't argue with gravity. The way it builds a golf course on the moon, I'll have to change my presentation. That's what happens when you don't have wheel-to-wheel coverage.
You have Saturn.
You have Saturn, absolutely. Saturn in West Vancouver, on your way to the British properties. So just to review, R over A. That's all you need. R over A in the square footage. So if you have a sports field, tab still here. Tab said this whole property is 26 acres with the school and everything, so let's say there's 10 acres of sports fields that need fertility on them. We do our R over A, which was 2.78 pounds, because Tab's using 18,918, times 10 times 43.56, divided by 55 pounds, which is what's a bag of fertilizer weighs, you know exactly the amount of bags stored. Done. Calculator, iPhone, we learned that this morning. Multiply by the accurate square footage, establish the throw width, divide by 1,000, set up your calibration area. We used to, everybody's got a yard, shop, whatever, we used to just paint lines in the shop and that's what. Put a known quantity of product in the hopper, walk the specified distance, measure the output. And the collection should be half because we're only doing half a pass. It doesn't become a whole pass until we come back the other way, right? Adjust the setting to achieve the desired goal. That might sound like a lot of work. I don't know if I put that slide in here. Yeah, I certainly did. There's little value in summer fertilizer left in the fertility storage area in October. That's just cost your budget money. Any fertilizer schedule or program can be based on all of the previous points. To develop the fertilizer budget, manage inventory, help order throughout the season, and maintain environmental responsibility. Super important in my opinion. That's it. Thanks very much, Nick. There you go.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks, Dave, for coming out here. He's the man to go to for soil tests and fertility. Absolutely. Next up, we have Darcy Mathene, and like Darcy or David talked about, the triangle, the fertility, microbiology, and turfgrass. Darcy is the next corner in that triangle. He's the representative from Earthport Environmental Laboratories. Earthport specializes in monitoring soil biology, and he works with industry to develop practical remediation solutions. Earthport has developed many solutions for agriculture, horticulture, environmental remediation, and the whole like. So let's please welcome Darcy Lapine. David.
You got your So you might, I don't know if you want to just stand up and stretch your legs first, because we are going to get into this sort of somewhat heady topic, so I'll try to get through it as fast as we can. I know we need to get the credits for 2 hours, but I'll try and crunch it as fast as I can. So just, I know I'm batting clean up here at the end of the day, so I'm pretty tired. Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah. This should be just don't go too far, guys. We'll start pretty soon.
I'll herd the cats that are outside.
Okay, we're ready to go anytime here, so. Everyone's got their coffee?
Grab one coffee if you want. Why don't you go ahead,
Okay, yeah. Any stragglers out there? Grab. Okay, so as Nick mentioned, my name is Duncan. I represent a company called Earthwork Environmental, headed out of Corvallis, Oregon. And we specialize, as Nick was mentioning, just in that biological component. So for basically the first time, this is going to be a lot of new information for people. Haven't probably heard this perspective or this missing component that's been lacking from the manager's toolbox for quite some time. I just want to go through the first sort of basic concept of what I'll be talking about today, and that's the concept of creating habitat. Okay, so basically what you see here is a skate park, right? Chances are you're not going to see mothers, new mothers with newborn babies or elderly hanging out in this type of environment. So the environments actually dictate the inhabitants. So when we're building a sports field or reconstructing a green, we need to know what type, from the biogeochemical perspective, all three, an emphasis on testing now, I'll get to that because that's what we can do. We need to understand all three of those things in what type of environment, the whole picture of the environment that we're actually creating. So as the same thing goes, you're not going to see teenagers here either, are you? Right? So as it is, environments dictate inhabitants. And so soil is habitat for plants, right? So we see this, I guess it's best illustrated at this point in green roofs. So there's a big push for green roof technologies over the last few years. What's happened now, they're in a major issue because they started out by creating this environment. They needed certain characteristics out of the geological component because of weight restrictions. They planted the plants into the environment, and 3 years later, all those plants are gone and there's new plants in there, right? So all the weedy species basically came in and took over because the habitat that they created, right, selected for whatever nature figures should grow there, right? So nature's always fighting against you, especially in management situations. So that's the main point of what we're talking about here, is creating the appropriate habitat for whatever intended plant or cultivar that we're trying to grow. And we need to monitor not only the chemistry, but the biology, because the biological component is that missing link that drives soil chemistry or soil chemists crazy, because they don't know what's going on chemically, because you have this external force, right, that's always manipulating and changing, because these living organisms in the soil secrete different substances, right? Base substances from bacteria, acidic substances from fungi, right? So it's always changing and keeping that soil solution dynamic all the time. So even testing is only a snapshot of what's actually happening in the soil, and you just get an indicator. It's dynamic all the time. So a little bit about us. We were, originally let's take a breath on this one, the Oregon State University Soil Microbial Biomass Laboratory Extension Service. So we leave it up to PhDs to keep things simple, right? So originally, Oregon State University, they grew in the 80s to over 8,000 plus samples annually, which was way larger than they ever anticipated. anticipated when they originally did this. And in the beginning, what they were looking at was forest soils and trying to understand what's going on from the natural systems, that basically trying to understand how Mother Nature works from that angle, working backwards to apply those tactics and management strategies to for land managers. So then we were privatized as the soil food web, because they said we can't handle this within the university, so let's move it out. So that was, some of you may have heard if you've dug around in microbiology, of Dr. Elaine Ingham. So she was the founding director and doctorate for our organization. She's no longer, I will disclose that with the organization, she's retired. So at the peak, we consisted of 7 independently run satellite laboratories on 4 continents. The flagship Oregon food web in Corvallis, next to the university, merged into Earthfort in 2005. Because after 15 years or so, or more actually, if you break back to the university, we were testing things that industry provided no solutions for, right? There was no concrete way to manage, so we could see what was going on, we could study and tell, but there was nothing in the tool bag, you know, for land managers to take advantage. So that's where Earthfort stepped in. Our engineers, it took them almost 7 years to figure out how to get the product line organized so that we could actually start to create solutions for people. And so our research is based on hundreds of thousands of soil samples from different natural managed systems on 6 continents over 20 plus years. So we have a pretty massive data set to learn from. So we currently service multiple industries: bioremediation, agriculture, horticulture. So our main role is as a laboratory, so we do the testing and the analytics, and then we we build products and we sell them off to industry. So we don't have actually any direct contact with end users, other than in trial situations, which I will just mention. We are working with Kwantlen Polytech to start trialing within this region here. We've got a couple formalities and paperwork to get through, but there'll be another symposium like this, I guess, to call the Kwantlen whole, so we'll be able to go down that road when we have time. So a scientific advisory board, we have Dr. Catherine Higley, she's the Director of Nuclear Engineering and Radiation Health at OSU. Catherine Reardon is a soil microbiologist at USDA. Efren Kazaris is a mycologist specializing in mycorrhizae fungi, which you may have heard of mycorrhizae. Dr. Steve, he's a forest mycologist, and Edwin Liam is our resident chemist and advisor. Okay, so integrated soil management. So the biological component, measure it, now we can manage it. We can measure it and we can manage it, right? Pretty simple, straightforward. So again, as I mentioned, using natural systems, using nature as a model for management. So what is our enemy, if you will, right? When we're trying to construct a sports field with a turfgrass monoculture, what are the external forces that are playing against us here all the time, right? So let's figure that and work backwards. So how do we match this high productivity? Obviously, nature is fairly productive. So the rules of the game, right? So I can't go into any further detail telling you, and I use this football analogy, what's the point of knowing what a quarterback or a defensive back or a safety does when you don't even understand the rules of football, right? So here's the game as far as planting plants goes. It's a concept of ecological succession. No, that's 2 words and 8 syllables. It gets a little confusing. But essentially it means ecological succession is the change in the variety and abundance of life within an environment over time. And that's predictable and it's orderly. Okay, so we can measure that progress. And essentially what that converts to us is that's the natural recovery process. So if you plant a plant or an environment is created, it's a timeline, growing in greater complexity. And then when a disturbance happens, you reset that timeline, you start over again. So every time we disturb something within the environment, we're resetting that clock. As we mentioned. So some of the natural, obviously, disturbances or storms, weather, fire, these types of things from natural sources, but also man-made disturbances, right? So the 300-pound rugby player, the intensive management practices, the angry golfer out there, and reconstruction, the construction of the whole entire field itself, right? So that's a major disturbance. So in nature, recovery is a very slow process. It takes literally thousands of years to evolve into the end line. And that end line is, if there were no disturbances, which there aren't, but bear with me here, go with me. If there were no disturbances, we literally would continue marching on that timeline, and everywhere around you would be an ancient oak tree forest, right? That is the oldest ecosystems on the planet, are oak tree forests, right? So there's a whole biogeochemical profile that we can monitor as that process happens. So in nature, really slow. That's why we develop the products. So we can hit that fast forward button and get you to where you need to be in terms of habitat and for your intended cultivar. So this is an illustration of ecosystem recovery and that point. So every time you have a disturbance, you're resetting this clock. And the determining factor, the measurable that goes along through this, is actually the growth of soil fungi. So bacteria are really hardy. They can live through most things. But fungi are quite delicate, right? And they're more complex, and they're a higher order a little bit. They're higher than the bacteria on the bottom of the food chain, all life on this earth. So they take time. And essentially, that's how we know what it is. So you can sort of see that natural progression. So I do want to mention there's two types of succession, right? So there's the primary, which is like lava flows, landslides, glacier tills, and total reconstruction, right? Because you're completely changing that environment. You're totally ripping it up and tearing it, much the same. Then there's secondary, which is just storms and floods and fires and maintenance. So if you have an established community and you come in and you create a disturbance, it's a quicker process to rebound, right? So just typical use is generally considered secondary. Primary is actual total reconstruction, so we need to load up the soil to fit that appropriately. So ecological succession actually includes all of life, okay? So from microbiology all the way through to us. So let's break it down to what really matters to us, and that's called plant succession. So that can be categorized into three categories. We have defined them as a pioneer system, a pastoral system, and a sylvan system. So, as you can see by the illustrations, the pioneer system is bacterial dominated. So usually a 10 or 50 to 1 bacteria to fungi ratio in your soil solution, your soil profile, I should say. As the time moves forward and more fungi keep growing, then you start to see a shift in those ratios. So you're about a 1 to 1 when you get to pastures, right, and grasses where we want to live. And then if you keep going in time, then you get to trees, right? So if you're growing broccoli, you're over here. If you're growing pasture grass or turf grass, you want to be here in a pastoral system. Wow. And the sylvan system, if you're growing a hazelnut or cherry or a cedar hedge or anything like that. That's what you get for bad cleanup here, I guess. So again, the biogeochemical, the 3 soil properties. I'm here today to introduce and tell you that now you can look at the biological component, okay? So we can add that to Dave Duncan's soil testing. And actually Dave, because we work with industry, Dave is repping the products for us here. If you have any concerns, all this stuff is through. So in a pioneer system, they generally tend to be bacterially dominated. And the chemical characteristics that biology changes, okay, is generally the system is anaerobic because of the disturbance, right? So now it's anaerobic, it's compacted, and because you have way more bacteria to fungi, your soil solution right in the root zone, right in the rhizosphere, okay, which is totally different than bulk soil. So we want to disclose that. What's happening in the root zone is completely different than what's going on in bulk soil. So in the root zone, okay, we are pushing that soil solution. It wants to become alkaline and more alkaline. Okay, and so what we can characterize out of that is the nutrient release from the soil is erratic, and the type of organisms that are in there are what we call nitrifiers. Okay, so they specialize in the one process, the nitrogen cycle, that convert available nitrogen to nitrite. So what this does is it limits nitrate availability, okay, which favors the growth of weeds. Okay, so this, why it's so hard to get stuff established, and why weeds keep crushing in, right? And you're fighting it off to try and get your perennial established, because that perennial grass is actually way down here on the ecological timeline. Okay, so weeds define as highly successional species that devote more energy into seed production than root development. Okay, so it's an important distinction. It's not just a plant in the wrong place, right? By that definition, a rose in a wheat field is a weed, right? That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about, because of the limiting situations that we created through the construction process, we're favoring weeds because of the limitation of nitrate, okay, which is what the nitrogen form that plants need, one. So what they're allowed to grow in these marginal soil conditions, and that's why weeds always tend to come in after you manage something and then weeds show up, okay, because it's the law of nature. You're going to start at the beginning and you're going to keep moving forward. And every time you disturb it, it sets you back. So they actually provide us a purpose. Like weeds are there for a reason. They're highly successional species because they can grow in those limited environments. And when their fast life cycles die off, they actually recontribute to that organic matter, right? And they start to build, again, adding organic matter, which allows the fungi and allows the whole process to carry on, right? So everything serves a function, even disease. Okay, so moving to pastoral. So now we're becoming more aerobic. As the soil fungi continue to grow in numbers and biomass, we're secreting more acidic substances, we're starting to balance the pH naturally, and they're starting to grow and sort of frack apart the soil and open it up so that they can actually let more water in, okay? So we're becoming more porous, we're aerobic, we're neutral, and now nutrient release, because the organisms now, the habitat is favoring the different group of organisms, of bacteria. The predominant form of nitrogen in the system is nitrate, okay? So now we're favoring, so if we add soil fungi, beneficial soil fungi, we can alter the chemistry of the soil, right? To favor our grasses and not the weeds. So then down to sylvan systems, which are the fungally dominated. So if you're planting a cedar hedge or anything like this, we need 10 fungi to 1 bacteria. And the nitrogen that's released out of that situation in an acidic system is now mostly in the form of ammonium, okay, which is favored by most trees. So let's meet the players here. The 4 main functional groups of soil microbiology. So they're adding more every day with the new genetic sequencing. We're up to 100,000 plus different species living in the bugs. So if you think chemistry is complicated with 13 or 14 different nutrients, okay, now let's factor in 100,000 different parameters and variables that are shifting around. So we lump them into 4 functional groups, we call them. So fungi and bacteria represent the microflora. So you can, through the image, pretty much like a pasture, right? Fungi are mushrooms, bacteria are algae-like species, closer related to plants than animals, right? So we class them into the microflora. And then the second tier, next level up, if you will, are the protozoa and nematodes, okay? So this sort of predicates this concept of nitrogen cycling. What happens is that the protozoa and nematodes are much like horses and cattle in the soil, okay? So they eat the grass, the bacteria and the fungi. And so a little example is a protozoa has a carbon to nitrogen ratio of 30 to 1. And you don't really have to worry about carbon and nitrogen, but just simple math. 30 to 1 is the requirement for that protozoa to live. Bacteria has a carbon to nitrogen ratio of 5 to 1. So that means that that protozoa has to consume 6 bacteria in order to fulfill their 30 carbon requirement. But they only need 1 nitrogen, right? So we're left over with 5. 5 from 6, or from 6 leaves us over with 5 nitrogens. So that 5 nitrogens now gets secreted out the rear end, just like manure, as manure is fertilizer on a microscopic level, right? So we're releasing nutrients in the soil by the living interactions of organisms in the soil. So that's why it's so hard for soil chemists to understand what the heck's going on when you're only looking at chemistry, right? There's the biological component, the changing stuff all the time. So we can look at those 4. So primary benefits of bacteria, the primary decomposers, so they eat the chlorophyll. You see as a plant dies and it goes yellow, they basically break it down. They eat the chlorophyll, the internal structures of the scaffold, if you will. Fungi come along and break the scaffold down, so you need both of them, right? So they also secrete enzymes. So they're always creating byproducts off their bodies, right? Which actually function in the soil because nobody's fertilizing the forest. How does anything grow, right? So, well, it's through this process. They secrete the enzymes that actually break the chemical bonds. As well, most of the antibiotics that we take, right, to fight the microorganisms that make us sick, we find the antibiotics from other microorganisms. So there's lots of organisms in the soil that secrete antibiotics to the host plants to protect their food source, right? Because plants are pumping carbohydrates out of their root zone, through root exits, all the time, right? And that chemical marker will say if the plant is stressed, it'll release stress. And then disease organisms are actually evolved to pick up on those chemical tracers and then congregate and say, hey, over here, this is a diseased plant, let's colonize this, right? So they can actually protect their host plants by secreting antibiotics. So they keep that mutualist situation going on. And the major component here is we're competing for resources with pathogens, right? So we're occupying space. When we do apply biology or we build up biology, we consider that. We want to create the New York City street, okay? We don't want to keep the open plains highway, right? We want to just get things in the way. So if you picture it like the safari, within the soil solution, we've got elephants, right, that just simply get in the way. We've got alligators that'll eat you. We've got monkeys that'll just come and steal your food, right? So there's all kinds of different bugs interacting to achieve balance. So bacteria can just be, there are three major terms that might come up. Anaerobic or no oxygen, so they breathe nitrogen. Some of the other extremophiles can actually breathe iron, which is crazy. But aerobic organism, or bacteria I should say, are only need oxygen. Anaerobes will die in the presence of oxygen as well. So if you aerify it, kill off those ones. Most diseases are anaerobes, okay? Facultative anaerobes usually. And facultative, which they could switch back and forth. So just to come up with a couple of the common shapes: sphericals, which are cockeyes, rod shapes, bacilli, and helicals or spirals, so some of the different forms. So primary functions of fungi, the fungus. They're the hard residues, or like I said, of the scaffolding. They tear down the lignin, right? The cellulose, those harder things that decompose. So basically in corn crops and stuff like that, you see the stubble sit there for years. Well, that's because of lack of fungi that they can't break it around. They also taxi bacteria around. So bacteria only grow from one epicenter and they grow out exponentially. They don't actually really move around. So they grow, that's how they spread. So they can actually hitch rides at the back of the fungi as its mycelium, or a strand, grows deeper into the soil profile in search of nutrients or water. Okay? So they provide functions. And then the big kicker here is actually only found out or discovered in 1996. Okay, so it's, for science, it's pretty new. The substance called glomalin. So essentially what soil fungi do is they slough their skin, much like snakes. Okay, and that discarded snake skin, if you will, is the substance called glomalin, and it makes anywhere from 3 to 40% of all soil carbon, which is pretty significant. And here is the result. So soils, this is a soil clod, 2 soil clods dumped into water. And you can clearly see that this, on my right now, is from a field that was a no-till field for 7 years, and the other one is from a conventionally managed field for 7 years. So you can see the high probability of leading to compaction, right, through the managed system with no soil fungi. This just all settles down, those tiny microaggregates all just lock up and create a whole crusty layer that, you know, creates adverse conditions. So this is what actually the soil fungal net looks like. This is a 54,000 times magnification. So we're talking really, really small, way out of sight. There's a couple more photos here. This is backed off to 1,000. So you can see they grow like strands, literally. And so if any of you walked in the forest and kicked over a fallen log and you see what looks like cobwebs everywhere, that's actually fungi. That's not spiders. That's fungi that's there. And it's millions and billions of strands that make up and twist like rope and create a bigger biomass. So you can see some of the different shapes and rods. And this is actually a photomicrograph of a compost tea. And you can see the little spore right here off of the fungi itself. So up to the horses and the cattle. So the protozoa, the primary agents of nutrient cycling, they consume bacteria and fungi. They help to balance the populations of bacteria and fungi and just kind of keep everything in check. And they have 3 subcategories: flagellates, amoeba, and ciliates. So we can measure all of those. I'll go into testing later on. And they all tell us different things about what's happening in the soil. So you can see the relative size here. This is a grouping of ciliates, and these are all bacteria. So you can see how small they are in relation, right? is the underside of what the little critter looks like. So within a teaspoon of soil, you have thousands, if not in a healthy soil, tens of thousands of these little critters running around, eating bacteria and fungi, cycling nutrients. So to allude to Dave Duncan's talk just about foliars and bypassing the soil with granular application, this is really what breaks and frees up and unlocks that P, that phosphorus in the soil. These are the organisms. Organisms are what promote this. So the analogy that I give is, if fertilizer is the gas, biology is the oil, okay, for that engine. So microbiology is as important to plant performance as oil is to engine performance. Okay, very important fact to take home. So this is a photograph of an amoeba. So we can just a couple of interesting photos to see what they look like. Flagellates, little tadpoles scurrying around, collecting up bacteria. So here's some, the other ones, those are scanning electron microscopes. So we back off and see actually what sort of we're looking